All right, I'm here with Tate today to talk to you about shoulder impingement in baseball players and softball players. So all throwing sports can create impingement in the shoulder, and it's super common, and so I want to address this here and show you how it happens. So a lot of what happens is, actually Tate's doing a good job right now of rounding just a little bit where he's flexed. I'm going to exaggerate this slightly, but this position where it rounds the shoulder and allows the scapula, the shoulder blade, to come around a little bit. Actually, let me have you scoot sideways for a second. So when he's in good position, so whether he's seated or he's in a throwing position in standing, you want chest up, head neutral, scapula set, which means dropped down, not necessarily retracted. And that set position allows the scapula, the acromion, to open up a little bit and create a little bit more space in front. I'll show you the opposite. If we exaggerate this, if he does a posterior pelvic tilt and rounds here, you can see that his shoulders start to roll forward like this, and his head shoots a little bit more forward. So that changes the direction of pull on the scapula and the rotator cuff and makes it a little bit more difficult to raise his arm completely overhead, which throwing is done in an overhead position, most throwing except for softball players pitching. So interestingly, whether you're throwing overhead or underhand, the same types of rotator cuff problems happen. So it's universal to the throwing motion, not so much whether you're throwing overhead or underhand. So softball and baseball players have the same rotator cuff problems. So ultimately, that position will allow more irritation and more impingement of the rotator cuff muscles, creating bursitis and irritation of the bursa underneath the acromion, the bone that comes out here, or stress or fraying of the rotator cuff if allowed long enough to do that. So let's have you face forward. So ultimately, the position makes a big difference. Secondary to that, another thing I see a lot of is athletes trying to throw with their arm, which seems like, duh, of course you throw with your arm, but actually where you want to get most of the force is from your legs. That does the majority of the work, where as you drive that hip, then that strength from your legs gets transferred to your hip, and if you have strong enough abs and back muscles, gets transferred to your torso, then into your shoulder, then into your arm, and then the ball. So if that timing is off or anything along that chain is weakened or is mistimed, then you have a loss of energy, a loss of power, loss of speed, and sometimes significant pain depending on how you're doing that, how you're throwing. So back to impingement. Ultimately, what you'll find in impingement is anytime you're in an end range position, so if you're all the way across your body like that, if you're overhead like this, or if you're all the way as far back as you can, that will create some discomfort because you're maximally stressing the rotator cuff and it can't sustain that position, and it's riding up and either pinching on the bursa or pressing right on that tear within the rotator cuff or potential tear, causing some irritation to that area there. So, so that's the majority of what causes impingement. Actually sleeping on it, let me add a few more things. Sleeping on that side, where you're sleeping on that side and it's pushing in like this, the shoulder typically gets compressed in and rides up and then presses against the acromion again and jams those rotator cuff muscles in there. That's another frequent source. And anything, again, where you're reaching in those end ranges of motion. What I see a lot is people grabbing a dish out of the drawer, painting overhead. A lot of moms actually are reaching into the back of the car and grabbing their purse. All of those can cause significant irritation to the shoulder. If you're a throwing athlete, and so either softball, baseball, football, and your shoulder is hurting, you feel like you might have impingement, let's get you checked out to make sure it's not a rotator cuff tear and get you feeling better as soon as possible.